it's Katie Crysdale here from Lakeview Aquatic Consultants. Welcome back to the channel, or welcome if you are here for the first time. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the recently released guidance for public cold plunge pools here in the province of Alberta. I want to give a little bit of background about this issue, and then we're going to dive into the document. I'm going to share it directly on the screen. It is also linked in the description box down below. As a little bit of background, many of you know me for the certified pool operator class I teach. Other people know me as a management consultant for swimming pools. What does that mean? That means I help existing facilities, deficient facilities, as well as new facilities figure out what they need to do in terms of documentation and compliance in the jurisdiction where they operate. I'm based in Alberta near Calgary, so the vast majority of our new permit clients are located here in Alberta. Not exclusively, but a lot of them are located here in Alberta. I've been doing this type of work now for about 5-6 years, and the number of inquiries we've had regarding cold plunge pools over the last 3 years has been astonishing. The idea of contrast therapy, doing recovery in cold water, Nordic spas, all of these types of facilities have really exploded in popularity here in Western Canada. In the past, this was not part of the work I did as a pool operator or even as a consultant. And now it is probably 30 to 40% of my ongoing projects are facilities that would like to add cold plunge pool. It's not just hotels and day spas. We've also seen a wide range of clients come to us from municipalities, residential buildings, like condo buildings, apartment buildings, gyms, physiotherapy clinics. It's everywhere. So in this video, I want to talk about how here in Alberta specifically, a cold plunge pool is considered a swimming pool. It is not an exemption. It is not a variance. And that is why, in my opinion, Alberta Health Services needed to come out with this guidance, because for every call or inquiry I personally have as a consultant, people who find us on the internet, whether they choose to use our services or not, Alberta Health Services inspectors are receiving 10 times those inquiries. There has been a lot of different questions. I feel that this document, which we're going to go through together, really highlights what you need to know if you want to add one of these facilities. If you are located outside of Alberta, you may still find this video helpful because I'm going to be taking you through the regulatory piece, and you can look up the regulations in your province or state. But you do need to know that in many jurisdictions, until there is a specific category or variance created, a cold plunge pool is still a form of swimming pool. I can't say for every jurisdiction what that means, but that is one of the key pieces of information going into our discussion I do want you to be aware of. A cold plunge pool is a swimming pool. No different from what I teach in the certified pool operator course, that a hot tub, a lazy river, a wading pool, a water slide is all a pool. It has pumps, filters, chemical requirements, flow, turnover. All of those elements exist to a smaller extent on a cold plunge pool, but it's still a pool. So let me pull this document up on the screen. So the main thing that has caused a lot of confusion, in my opinion, is people not understanding that cold plunge pools are swimming pools. So if you are a gym or a physiotherapy clinic or some sort of beauty treatment spa, and you did not previously have a licensed or regulated body of water, this is a whole new world for you to consider. A cold plunge is a form of swimming pool here in Alberta. Every component of a swimming pool still applies in the introduction of a cold plunge to that facility. And that is the main thing we're going to see in this document, that AHS is trying to provide that guidance because there's so much confusion because of the absence of information until now, where people have drawn their own individual conclusions and they haven't been correct. I have spoken to probably almost a dozen individuals who have gone ahead and procured cold tub units off of the internet. They get a targeted ad. I'm not going to name any brands, but I get them as well in my constant use of social media. The algorithm knows I'm interested in pools, saunas, cold plunge. We get these ads that talk about recovery solutions in cold water. I've spoken to a number of would-be business owners or operators here in Alberta who are really upset to discover they've spent $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 out of province, even out of country, to get a very flashy looking unit delivered to their location. And then they go to initiate an operating permit with AHS, Alberta Health Services, the regulatory component, and they are shocked to discover that it is not an easy hill to climb. This is not laying any sort of blame on Alberta Health Services. They are the enforcement piece of provincial legislation. I want to be very clear. People don't understand health inspectors, their role. They are basically the police officers, metaphorically, for the legislation that is written by legislators elected by the people at the capital. So in Alberta, in Edmonton, municipal legislators have created the pool regulations. AHS staff, public health inspectors, officers of health, they're not creating any sort of red tape. This is the existing legislative framework. If the framework changes, then policies may change. But at the moment, we are currently all working off of the Alberta pool regulations that have not changed in a number of years. With those units that people procure off the internet, they may not even be commercial grade. Often they are residential grade, which means they are geared for people to have them in their homes. They are not a fast enough turnover, for example. They may not have a fast enough flow rate. They may not have the appropriate safety protocols, such as anti-entrapment drain covers, suction outlet fittings, pump limiting devices. They may not have chemical feeders directly installed. They may not have appropriate filtration or chemical controllers, because in a commercial setting, we have different components that need to be verified and tested under certain standards like NSF, ANSI, ASTM, UL for electrical. Each of those individual components in a swimming pool in Alberta is regulated to be installed at a certain size, caliber, or type. No different is cold plunge. I have been the bearer of bad news as a consultant for a lot of individuals who've contacted me saying, I have this unit delivered. I just need support with the documentation. They don't realize until we have a free consultation, there is a lot more that goes into it in terms of the permit application process and the equipment approval long before we even get into the documentation and the operational policies that are required to operate a pool in Alberta. We're going to look at each one of these components, starting with this cold plunge guidance, reading directly from the document. Cold plunge pools are small pools filled with cold water that people use for a short time. They are sometimes called cold tubs or tanks, ice baths, or cold water immersion therapy basins. These pools may be in spas, gyms, wellness centers, or other facilities. Recirculating cold plunge pools must follow all public pool requirements. Cold plunge pools that are drained and filled after each person are exempt from those rules, but they must still be kept clean. This is the first juncture that is very important. There are facilities such as physiotherapy clinics that have historically used the Hubbard tank. They put in tap water and a scoop or two of ice. The athlete sits in the Hubbard tank. Then it's drained, scrubbed, and refilled between customers or patients. That is not considered a swimming pool. It is not recirculating. There's no additional chemicals added. It's tap water. There is no water testing that's happening. There's no filtration, no recirculation, no flow. The use of the tank is meant to be exclusively one patient or guest. Have I seen in practice in my years working at different facilities, multiple athletes sharing the same tub? Absolutely, but that's not the official protocol, and that's not permitted. If I go to get a pedicure at a nail salon, that water is exclusively for my feet. It is drained after each guest. The basin is sanitized. That is not a swimming pool. I have also seen in my personal experience around the province, some facilities are offering a cold tub experience. And when you get into the finer details, it is literally a bathtub, perhaps decorative and freestanding, but it is a bathtub with cold water that ice has been added to it. Or there is, for example, beauty treatments where special minerals or salts or herbs or kelp, let's say, added to the tub. It is not a recirculating body of water. If it's going to be recirculating and not going to be drained between customers, it does need to follow Alberta guidance. Moving back to the document, this guide is for public cold plunge pools and does not apply to cold plunges in lakes or rivers, such as polar bear dips or cold plunge pools in private homes for homeowners' use. This is a really thorny area. If you've watched my videos before, you know I've talked about gaps in oversight in many jurisdictions when it comes to private home rentals, whether it's overnight accommodation through a website such as Airbnb or Vrbo, whether it is a private swimming pool rental through a website such as Swimply, if we're talking about bed and breakfast scenario where people are booking accommodation with someone else in the home, there is a lot of gray area that people can abuse the system, or there's not the same oversight that there should be, in my opinion. I would point you to a presentation I did a couple months ago at the Southwest Pool and Spa Show pertaining to the commercial use of residential pools. Reading from the document, recirculating cold plunge pool requirement. A public cold plunge pool that recirculates water and does not drain and fill after each person meets the definition of a public swimming pool under the Public Swimming Pool Regulation. This means the operator must comply with requirements of the Alberta Public Swimming Pool Regulation and the pool standards. The cold plunge pool needs a pool permit before it can open. This is the number one issue I have personally and professionally encountered. People assume because they have a business license to operate in their municipality or because they have occupancy from the city after construction that they are entitled to purchase a freestanding cold tub unit online and simply add it to their business. So for example, if I am a spin studio, that I am entitled to add a cold plunge to my change rooms. That is not the case without following the permit process, which we will look at. To apply for a permit and learn about approval requirements, refer to the following resources. There is the pool permit and renovations application. There are instructions to support a pool permit application and public swimming pool approval checklist, in addition to the previously cited pool regulations and standards. Let's have a look at each one of those documents. This first application is what you're going to use here in Alberta if you are applying for a permit for the first time, or if there is a change of ownership, which invalidates the previously granted permit between entities, if you're doing a major renovation or there's some other issue. I've encountered this permit application in many different client projects, and this is completely unrelated to your building permit process for anything like construction, electrical, gas, fire code, etc., occupancy. This is the pool permit specific application in Alberta. This is for any body of water, including a cold plunge, which is a form of swimming pool. That is where I've seen some people attempting to complete this form and they've marked themselves as other because they're applying for a cold plunge, not realizing that a cold plunge pool is a swimming pool. I'm not going to go through this form in complete detail. That could be the subject of another video. You do need to go through and have all of the pertinent information. Where is the site located? Who's going to be the owner? Who's going to be the operator? And then when we go to page 2, that is where the bulk of the information required is a surprise to different clients I have spoken to. When we are talking about the items required to issue a permit in Alberta, this is the preliminary application. Alberta Health Services will review the information you've submitted and proceed on to an on-site inspection and certain things we're going to talk about. But initially, to start the permit process, all of these documents listed here on the screen do need to be provided to Alberta Health Services. Some of them will be duplicates of things you already have in the construction of your site. But in the example of a gym that's already been operating for a period of time, there are going to be things you may not have that you may need to go and collect. There needs to be a copy of the permit issued under the Safety Codes Act pertaining to the construction site. There needs to be a site plan submitted. There needs to be a floor plan submitted. There needs to be a structural plan submitted. And these are all technical documents. It is not the case that I'm going to sketch these items out on paper. These need to be industry trade documents done in CAD or Revit or any other system is used by engineers and architects. If applicable, there needs to be a diagram showing the location and dimensions of the diving, swimming, and deck areas. There needs to be a mechanical plan, which includes the plumbing schematic. There needs to be equipment schedules or cut sheets for each basin, each play feature, each sauna, each steam room. There needs to be a list of the chemicals you're going to use to disinfect the water, i.e. what form of chlorine, and manage the pH, i.e. something like muriatic or hydrochloric acid. There needs to be evidence of pool operator training appropriate to the province of Alberta. There's certain courses permitted, and it needs to be current within 5 years. It cannot be expired. There needs to be a submission of the proposed signage. This is safety requirements we're going to see in the pool standards. There needs to be proposed documentation regarding written policies. This is also going to come from the Alberta pool standards. And there needs to be a completed anti-entrapment plan. And all of this needs to be for each basin. So if you're going to install 5 cold plunges of varying temperatures in your facility, there needs to be 5 permit applications. Some of the information may be duplicated across units, but some of it may not. A lot of these manufacturers that make different cold plunges, they have different sizes of basin, different colors, different finishes, different types. So each model is different in the documentation, and you can't just copy paste. This is the permit form. Let's take a look at the Alberta pool standards to supplement some of these areas. If you need any support, this is a service we do offer in terms of consulting, guiding you through collecting these documents or working with trades if they're unfamiliar with these documents. I recently completed a client project where it was the first time the general contractor had ever done a project with pools, although they were very experienced in all other aspects of construction in terms of electrical code, gas code, occupancy code, etc. in the city of Calgary specifically. They were less familiar with, for example, the anti-entrapment plan, which is a specific form that needs to be completed in a specific way. So let's have a look next at the Alberta pool standards. All of the documentation specified in the Alberta pool standards also needs to be followed for a cold plunge in any application in Alberta. This legislation came into force in July of 2014, but it's important that you're looking at the January 2018 amendment because there were some tweaks that came out. There has been discussion about further updating the pool code here in Alberta as of 2026, but nothing is currently happening, and that seems unlikely, in my opinion, in the immediate future, given the current political climate. The Alberta pool standards applies to every single commercial pool application in Alberta except for residential homes. I'm not going to get into other basins or other types of pools in this video, but suffice it to say, if you have a lazy river, a hot tub, a spa, jacuzzi, whirlpool, lazy river, water slide, lap pool, all of those basins also fall under the Alberta pool standards. The only current exemption for some sort of water body would be a float tank, which falls under personal services currently. This document has basically how we do what we are legally required to do. The Alberta pool regulation is the what you're supposed to do, but how we do it is expressed in the Alberta pool standards. Both are binding in terms of enforceable by an Alberta Health Service health inspector, but the pool standards are often where the cold plunge operators or potential owners are the most surprised, especially if they don't have a swimming pool background. Having worked with different types of clients with retail background, physiotherapy, paramedical background, fitness background, they don't have any pool experience. That doesn't mean they're not welcome to open up and operate these types of facilities, but the regulations can be a bit of a shock after they've already been successfully operating their businesses under other frameworks, if that makes sense. Our Alberta pool standards is very readable. I go through this at the end of every monthly certified pool operator class, so everybody is on the same page if you operate a pool here in Alberta. We can go roughly section by section. You can see the different components that are covered. Starting at the very beginning of this document, we have the purpose and the application. This is in line with what I mentioned before. Basically, all pools in Alberta are subject to the application of this document, unless it is, first bullet point, a structure containing water constructed for the sole use by owners of a single family dwelling and guests. That's potentially kind of vague depending on who you invite into your home, especially if you invite them for commercial business reasons. But that is currently how the law is written. A natural pool. And then this document does not apply if a pool of water is drained, filled, and cleaned after each use by an individual. As I suggested, a Hubbard tank in a treatment setting for one individual athlete. Or for example, I go to a day spa and I book some sort of body soak that is in a private suite just for me. That is not a swimming pool. It does not recirculate. The water is not shared between guests. It's me, then it's cleaned, and then the next guest enters. By default, then a cold plunge pool as a swimming pool in Alberta is subject to this application. The only bodies or entities or organizations that are exempt from this document here in Alberta are going to be federal agencies. If you are a military site, Department of National Defense, Army site, Air Force site, you are exempt from this regulation because it is considered federal land. Also exempt are going to be Indigenous lands, such as an Indigenous casino, Métis settlement. So in the Calgary area, we have, for example, Grey Eagle Casino and Resort on Tsuut'ina land. Even though that is within the city of Calgary, it is considered a federal land. No different from Stoney Nakoda towards Kananaskis. No different from River Cree Resort in Enoch, Alberta, just west of Edmonton, Cold Lake, those are exempt. And then the third federal exemption from provincial laws in Alberta is going to be Parks Canada land. So the Federal Parks Canada Agency, we're not talking about the town of Banff, which is in Parks Canada land. We're talking about a federal parks site. Banff Upper Hot Springs in Banff, Miette Hot Springs near Jasper, or the pool in the Kootenays. Those are federal pools. They are not subject to provincial regulations. Further down in this document, you are going to see that there are definitions. This is where a pool, basically a swimming pool, incorporates a cold plunge because by default, it is not a whirlpool with warmer water. Different provincial legislation has different categories. Here in Alberta, it's pretty simple. We have whirlpools, which are structures with warm water and jet action, and then almost everything else is a form of swimming pool. So a cold plunge, a cold tub, anything like that is going to be under the swimming pool category, which is more forgiving when it comes to turnover, but it does mean that every other component of the pool standards and pool regulations and the pool permit process here applies. You will see here on the next page of the document, running through the requirements, a cold plunge operator or owner must have pool operator training. Here in the province of Alberta, there are only 2 approved pool operator classes. There is the Pool and Hot Tub Alliance certified pool operator class that I teach every month on Zoom. You can catch the schedule on our website, www.lakeviewaquaticconsultants.com. Navigate to the CPO menu and you'll see the list of upcoming classes. There is one other agency in Alberta that also offers approved training. Alberta does have a higher standard of training requirements as compared to other provinces. This often surprises people because there is the perception of Alberta as being less regulated in some industries, but our pool industry is actually more regulated in a way that protects operators and owners because there is a higher compliance and better practices, in my opinion. Moving down, you will see all of the pool maintenance items also apply. So you have a minimum temperature for the shower to be sanitizing, unless we are talking about a rinsing or a contrast shower. I've talked a lot about this on Instagram. If you don't have warm showers and if you don't offer decent soap products, which you do have to provide, you'll see on the next page. Of course, your bathers are not going to shower and they're going to bring contaminants in the pool. Spending a little bit more on body soap, hand soap, shampoo, that's going to make people more likely to use it as opposed to very astringent or drying, inexpensive products. That, in my opinion, as both a lifeguard, operator, consultant is a very basic thing that everyone can do. There is no minimum temperature currently in Alberta legislation. You will see the next line item talks about maximum pool temperature, but I do want to highlight that dry saunas and steam rooms are also inspectable items here in Alberta. As soon as you have a body of water to issue a swimming pool permit, your steam room and sauna also become inspectable. This was something I also recently encountered with a client. They were already operating as a business with a dry finish style sauna, and they were going to be adding a cold plunge. I let them know that by seeking out a swimming pool permit, their dry sauna would also now be inspectable. When currently, before they have a swimming pool permit, it is not an inspectable item by the province unless there is a complaint. If a complaint is registered with Alberta Health Services, whether you get sick at a restaurant, you're concerned your child got sick at daycare, any sort of business that may be a vector for infection or disease outbreak, Alberta Health Services has the right to inspect those locations. There are requirements for ventilation in the space that will hold the swimming pool, i.e. cold plunge. This came up on a recent project where the inspector was looking for confirmation. The engineering of the HVAC in the area where this unit would be deposited was sufficient to make sure that the air was moving. There's not specific items that have to follow at that stage because the building is already open, but there needs to be airflow given the humidity, the moisture that's going to build up in the pool area, as well as the need to maintain against the buildup of disinfection byproducts. If you haven't taken a certified pool operator class, you may not be aware that when chlorine attacks germs in the water, off-gassing of that chemical reaction is often what produces smells in the air. Combined chlorine in the water and chloramines are what create eye irritation. The more you smell a pool when you walk into the space, the less clean it is. That's a common misconception. Oh, if I smell the pool, the chlorine is high enough and it's a clean body of water, but it's actually the inverse. The more you smell a pool, the more there was contamination that reacted with chlorine and off-gassed. You do need to provide a clock with any sort of heat amenities such as sauna or steam room. I would also recommend as a lifeguard and as somebody who is participating in an NSF committee pertaining to cold plunge regulations, you also want to provide a clock for your cold plunge users because the vascular response to cold water shock has huge impact on people with pre-existing medical conditions or different levels of health or obesity, comorbidities. Also, people just want to track their cold plunge, whether they can manage 15 seconds or 5 minutes. You do not want someone to overdo it and have a medical emergency in your cold plunge. As of right now, I'm not aware of any cases of fatalities or significant injury associated with cold plunge, but you do not want to be the first. And that is why I'm part of an NSF committee looking at the production of these units as well as operational recommendations. It may seem cool to say I have the coldest cold plunge in my jurisdiction or business area, but what about the potential risk if you have somebody elderly come in with a heart condition, etc.? We do need to provide soap in the washrooms and showers. And the showers is another piece that has surprised some potential clients I've spoken to in their consultation. You can't have no facilities, no restroom, no shower. There is certain sanitation facilities associated with bodies of water and protecting against contamination. All of this big picture needs to be looked at. It's not simply ordering a cold plunge unit off the internet and delivering it to your loading bay. We cannot have food in and around the pool area. This includes the cold plunge. Clear beverages like sports drinks or water are perfectly acceptable. Where I see we run into a lot of issues, especially in the more trendy facilities that are showing up on social media. The algorithm knows me well and shows me these facilities, smoothie bars, kombucha on tap, wine nights, or coolers. That is not conducive from a cleanliness or operational consideration, as well as from life safety. If somebody is mixing alcohol, intoxicants, and they may already be dehydrated from spending time in the sauna or steam room before jumping in the cold plunge, or they experienced a very hard workout before jumping in the cold plunge, they are at risk of medical emergency. You do not have to provide soap if it is a rinsing shower. For contrast, if I'm going from a hot sauna to a cold shower, but you do need to have showers somewhere else else in the vicinity that people can use to clean off before they get into the pool and after when they're getting ready to go home. The recirculation components listed in section 3 are another stumbling block I've encountered professionally in consulting on facilities that want to operate cold plunge here in Alberta. We do have recirculation requirements as well as minimum filter area requirements. When you are ordering from out of province or out of country, there is no guarantee the equipment was sized for the application in this jurisdiction. I've encountered a lot of language on the internet that comes from marketing talk where it says top of the line, best in class, even products sponsored by well-known athletes such as Michael Phelps. Those endorsements do not mean these units are suitable for either commercial application or your jurisdiction unadulterated. I'm speaking specifically about Alberta, but you can draw a lot of these conclusions similarly in other jurisdictions, whether you're talking about British Columbia, Ontario, Florida, or wherever you might live. To go down that rabbit hole briefly, I have also worked on projects recently where the owner has then had to go and change the product. So aftermarket replumbing, reconfiguration, which voids their warranty, which nobody is happy about, but that is the only way they can operate the unit in our jurisdiction of Alberta. Retrofitting, for example, flow meters or filter area to be compliant. It's not making anybody happy, but that's the only way to deal with the sunk cost of the money they have already spent to get to that point. My recommendation, if you want to use a cold plunge or add it to your business practice, is to do all of your research at the beginning and do not purchase or pay a deposit until you've worked with a professional engineer here in Alberta or a pool consultant, such as myself at Lakeview, to make sure you are navigating what needs to be done to avoid that type of frustration, delay, and huge cost overruns. All of the projects I've been on, we are talking 9 to 12 month delays plus tens of thousands of dollars of changes, amendments, as well as local review, to say nothing of the lost revenue or the rent that's being spent on a space that's not yet operating. Skipping over this next part of the document, it's going to talk about filtration and turnover. I'm keeping this at a very high level given that comprehensively we're talking about cold plunge. When you get to section 4, you are going to see the chemical requirements. This has been another stumbling block, especially if you're ordering from out of jurisdiction, whereby the chemical parameters of a unit manufactured, for example, in Mexico will not be the same chemical parameters as are required, for example, in Alberta. Maybe on some manufactured units, they can be adjusted on the controller or the set points can be modulated, but that has not been the case in my personal experience on every unit that has been delivered here. Free chlorine does need to be a minimum of 1 milligram per liter or part per million on water that is under 30 degrees Celsius, which is a cold plunge. People are running cold plunges 18 Celsius, 15 Celsius, 12 Celsius, 10 Celsius, 8 Celsius. I do not professionally recommend below 8 Celsius. That is extremely cold, and people do need to work up to that from a practical perspective. In addition to the free chlorine residual, we do need to be able to track, adjust, and create set points for free chlorine, as well as we do need to be able to monitor ORP, the oxidation reduction potential of the water, which is measured in millivolts. It does fluctuate. You will see ORP go up and down. It is variable based on factors we talk about in the certified pool operator class, such as pH, temperatures, and other chemistry factors. We also need to be able to test and monitor every day our combined chlorine. That is typically done manually, but our pH control does need to be automated. There needs to be automated feeding of pH control chemicals such as hydrochloric acid, muriatic acid, or bisulfate. And there also needs to be a controller where we can create set points based on probes and feeding of chemicals when the chemicals fall outside of the operational safety ranges. These are all equally required on cold plunge as a traditional swimming pool. The way I explain it to new clients, your gym with one cold plunge you think is going to be easy peasy lemon squeezy to add, you're going to be measured literally against your local municipal pool, which might be millions of dollars. Your system is smaller, but it's required to have the same components as a municipal pool. Total alkalinity, you measure manually through your daily water testing. Cyanuric acid we cannot use in an indoor setting. Section 5 details all of the daily operating records you are required to maintain with your cold plunge facility. This is something we can assist with if you need guidance in creating policies, documents, or checklists, but these are all standard trackable items. Every day of the year your business is open and the pool is available to customers, this needs to be done by somebody who is competent. Section 6, there is weekly bacteria testing required here in Alberta. You are sending a sample of water to Alberta Health Services. In your local community, there is a pickup point. All of the results of the bacteria testing are available on the Alberta Health Service pool facilities website. We need to ensure our bacteria testing is coming back under 100 colony forming units. We cannot have more than that, or we're going to get a call or an email from our local health inspector letting us know that the water sample came back as unsatisfactory, Pseudomonas was not isolated, or there might be something else in the water. We need to take extra operational steps to make sure the water is compliant. Manual water testing needs to be done at least once per day on each basin. If you have 3 cold tubs, you're going to need to do all of the testing on all of the basins. Automated controller readings must be consistent with manual tests. This is the other big one, is that there needs to be automation, automated feeders, automated control, automated water chemistry testing on these pools, which can be a shock for people. That is the same with cold plunge, no different from any other basin or swimming pool. Further in the pool standards, we need to maintain water clarity. This is basically a requirement that there be high quality water for our bathers. And then section 9, which is the anti-entrapment devices. This has been a huge stumbling block for clients we've worked with achieving their permitting on manufactured tubs delivered to Alberta. The factory may not have detailed records as to when exactly every component was installed or the unit was manufactured. And that becomes a real issue when we are looking at the individual anti-entrapment components that need to be labeled and dated, records of installation, independently verified to ensure they meet compliance with things like ANSI or APSP 16. That is very technical information that has, in my experience so far, not been available from every manufacturer out of jurisdiction that doesn't place the same importance on anti-entrapment as we do here in Alberta. If you followed me for any length of time, you know anti-entrapment protocol is something I am very passionate about, and there's a number of videos on the channel I would point you to regarding the Houston entrapment fatality of Alaya Lynette Jaco a few years ago, as well as other organizations such as Abby's Hope, which follows the story of Abigail Taylor, who was eviscerated by a pool drain in Minneapolis. Anti-entrapment is no joke, and unfortunately not everybody takes this as seriously as they should. It is a separate form we're going to see here in a little bit, pertaining to documentation that is required if you want to operate a cold plunge pool here in Alberta. The last couple sections of the Alberta Pool Standards, this is a 25-page document. These are all required to be complete in order to get your pool up and running. So you do need to draft this documentation for your local health inspector to approve prior to a permit inspection. You do need to have written policies and plans pertaining to pool safety and supervision. I'm not going to go item by item, but you can definitely see you need to have safety protocols, equipment in place. Maybe you want to have a waiver for your business. Other components such as signage and customer education all needs to be covered in a specific plan. If you need any support, this is a service that we do offer to all types of businesses. It also goes into patron education and notification, designing the wording and the aesthetics of the signage around your facility, as well as section 12, specific procedures or checklists to follow in the case of a water quality incident. Most people think about this in terms of poop and diarrhea, but it actually goes beyond that. You need to have protocols in place, not only for poop and diarrhea, but as you'll see noted down here in section I, how to deal with specific issues, for example, with microbiology, i.e. the water sample failing. You need to have a procedure in place for dealing with blood, food, chemicals that foul the water, vomit. Your procedure may be somewhat standardized, but it does need to exist for all of these specific areas. It cannot just be dumping the water, because dumping the water does not account for disinfecting the contamination, which will spread through the water system in terms of the pipes and the filter media. Lastly, within the Alberta pool standards, you need to have a general sanitation plan. The general sanitation plan details all of the areas of the facility that are going to be cleaned. What is the interval of cleaning? Is it daily? Is it weekly? Is it monthly? You also need to be prepared to share with your local health inspector what chemical substances are you going to be using. You need to use commercial grade cleaning products that have a drug identification number here in Canada. You cannot just use my mom's recipe of borax and vinegar, or I'm going to use essential oils or natural solvent I ordered on the internet. There needs to be a drug identification number, and most health inspectors will request to see the CT value, which is the contact time that it takes for killing specific panel of bacteria. If your supplier or your sales rep cannot provide that information, then it probably doesn't exist. These are standard pieces of information when I interact with any cleaning sales rep and I ask for the spec sheet with the CT value and the drug identification number. Most know exactly what I'm talking about. Those that do not are not, in my personal experience, retailing a commercial grade product, or they're new to the Canadian market and they don't yet know what's required in terms of labeling requirements, safety requirements, and registration requirements. Also, this often comes up pertaining to saunas, wood surfaces. People don't want to, quote, ruin the wood, but there is skin and bacteria that comes off of human bodies, and the infections associated with that, in my personal and professional opinion, are far worse than having to sand and refinish the wood periodically. The back part of this document also has appendices that can be helpful. Schedule A takes you through managing a contamination in the pool. It speaks to blood, vomit, formed fecal matter, and diarrhea in terms of guidance, but you still need to write your own checklist or procedure for your organization. It's not sufficient just to write on a side of a photocopied piece of paper. Further along, Schedule B is very important. I'm often working with clients who are very confused about max bather load. Maximum bather load is different in every province, but here in Alberta, it does pertain to flow of water, the speed, the turnover, and the number of hours per day the organization is going to have those pools open. It's not based on the square footage of the surface as it may be in other jurisdictions. Here, it is literally going to be, if your business is open longer, more hours, you're going to have more people in the course of a day than you can if you're open limited hours. And the last page of the Alberta Pool Standards is a schedule for flow capacity of submerged suction outlets. This is not something that comes up too often, but it is important to note this is a standard. So that particular document was the Alberta Pool Standards, which is the how we do the Alberta pool regulations. I'm not going to go through the Alberta pool regulations. I will link to it in the description box down below. It is pertinent in terms of definitions and broadly stating pools in Alberta are regulated. I do want to quickly show you the Alberta Health Services pool facilities website. This is the pools tab for the website where you can go and look up all of the pools in Alberta. I will put the link in the description box down below. Let's say, for example, I wanted to look up a Holiday Inn. I can type in Holiday Inn, and then it's going to sort by region. I'm going to have to look up which specific Holiday Inn I want to review. Each of these will pop out. It doesn't pop out on the screen for you, but it will pop into another tab. I want to show you the Alberta Permit Inspection Checklist. This is a very helpful document for keeping clients on track. There is a process whereby after completing construction and documentation, you need to make sure everything is squared away before inviting your health inspector on site to give an operating permit. It's very important everything is actually done. I encountered this before Christmas where a specific facility I was working with, they had a lot of things still in boxes. They were not ready to go when the health inspector came on site because they had the false impression only the pools need to be ready to go. So for example, if the toilet seats are not installed, the paper towel is not hung, the soap is not in the dispenser, the clocks are not mounted, all of those are inspectable items pertaining to the pool. The business thought because they had their occupancy permit from the city, the space was ready to go, even though it really wasn't when it comes to pool operations. That caused me to adjust the checklist I send to all clients, reiterating what items need to be done. This does not specify cold plunge, but as we've said throughout this video, a cold plunge is a form of swimming pool, so this checklist does need to be followed. This is the service we can provide if you want assistance getting your facility up and going. We do not do construction or project management of the construction, but if you need assistance with the permit process, that is certainly something we can do. We are doing more than just this checklist. This is the basic checklist that every operator or owner going for an AHS permit needs to follow. When we work with clients, we are going to the site many times in advance of this stage and looking at smaller details in terms of being paid to be paranoid where there may have been oversight in terms of tripping hazards, chemical hazards, staff hazards, equipment. There's a lot more to this, but this is the basic checklist everybody needs to follow in terms of construction being complete, the basins being cleaned and filled with tap water. It has to be potable water. We're not using gray water, runoff water, rainwater, lake water. We need to start bacteria testing at least 1 to 2 weeks prior to having the health inspector out to permit the site. They cannot grant an operating permit if there hasn't been a clean water sample. In my experience, when it comes to construction of new facilities, often there's a lot of construction debris in the air, in the vicinity, and the first water sample submitted may not pass. So all of this is working backwards from your intended soft opening. We never want to do a big grand opening because that creates unnecessary stress on the system that junior or newer pool operators may not be prepared to manage. Chemical parameters need to be tracked, tested daily, and monitored. You can't just say, I'm going to start after I get the operating permit. The health inspector needs to have confidence you are taking this seriously and you are going to continue doing what you already started before there was an inspection to monitor compliance. Cyanuric acid is only used in outdoor pools. I recognize lots of Nordic spas or contrast therapy sites may have an outdoor cold plunge. That means you can use cyanuric acid if you so choose, but it is definitely harder to manage water chemistry in smaller basins. Larger basins are far more forgiving. So a 2,500 liter cold plunge or 5,000 liter cold plunge is going to be a lot more tricky to manage than a bigger basin. Flow rate needs to be measured and measurable, as well as the minimum to achieve the turnover. There needs to be a properly installed measuring device. You need to be able to read it in live time. It is not, as somebody said to me once on the phone, we know the water is flowing because we can see it through the skimmers. That is not quantifiable. That is not a legal way of measuring the water. All of the submerged suction outlets need to be installed according to manufacturer specifications. That will lead us to the anti-entrapment form, which is a separate 6 to 7 page form that needs to be completed on each basin. I will link to that in the description box down below. Water needs to be less than 40 Celsius. Clocks need to be visible adjacent to hot water, but I would also say cold water is my professional recommendation. And then there needs to be reasonable provisions for dry saunas and steam rooms. I mention those because a lot of the contrast therapy probably have both associated with cold plunge. Soap must be provided. And then continuing on, we need to have those paper towels in dispensers ready to go. Water that's warm enough. People want to take a shower. The signage need to be posted. It can't just be sitting on the floor. It needs to be mounted. Suitable emergency and rescue equipment as applicable, an operational phone, written procedures, and operator training. So that is very late in the project. Typically after all your construction permits are closed, you have occupancy, the fire inspector's been out, the gas inspector's been out, electrical inspector. Pool is one of the very last things before your business opens. And if your business is already open, some of these things are easy to do because the business is already occupied and operating for a period of time, but that doesn't mean that there's no requirements. This video ended up becoming not only about cold plunge, but also the permit process and some of the cheeseburger. This video has already been about the permit process, not just operating cold plunge in Alberta. But since we've already talked about so many things, what's another couple minutes? Let's talk about the anti-entrapment form. This came into force in 2017 that every pool in Alberta must have an anti-entrapment compliance form completed on every basin. This was a shock for some reason, even though the application of this legislation was delayed several times. There was lots of chances given to people in terms of doing this. And yet, even today, I was reading something for a site I will not name where they didn't have their anti-entrapment form fully complete on file with Alberta Health Services. They were getting docked on that public disclosure website for repeated visits by their inspectors saying, this is outstanding. And there will reach a point where eventually the pool is shut down for not providing this information. It's not just about the information. The information is proving that what needs to happen has actually happened in terms of the correct drain covers, the correct suction fittings, the correct measurements. So that is where this form comes into play. This is the outdated version of this form. A new form was recently released, but you get the gist of it. I will link to the correct form down below. We need to have all of the information about the facility, information about the type of pool. As a cold plunge, that is going to be a swimming pool, whether it is indoor or outdoors, it is going to be a swimming pool. There is specific technical documentation. This is the only form we do not do. Your general contractor, your engineer, your pool construction company, or your installer of mechanical, they need to complete all of these pages. There are several pages documenting things such as pump curve, flow, vault size, placement, what planes, the floors and the walls, all of these items are on. Each of these forms needs to be very clearly completed. It's 7 pages with supporting documentation such as installation records, photos and measurements, certificates of authenticity from the fitting manufacturers. This is a very serious and important form. This is not something to be taken lightly. Unfortunately, I have seen vendors, service providers not take this seriously. This is one of the major stumbling blocks when you are ordering cold plunge units from outside of Alberta. It doesn't meet Alberta requirements. That's not to discourage you and say you cannot order from outside of Alberta or outside of Canada, but you need to do your due diligence and get the right type of equipment and engage with either an engineering consultant, a pool consultant, a building consultant early on who knows the codes and standards, because most of the phone calls I'm having with individuals, they do not realize the unit they have procured is not going to be permittable in Alberta without major modification and major expense and time delays. It's a lot. I think there is a lot of interest in cold plunge. There is a lot of value to adding these types of facilities to your business model or to your existing facility. I'm not here to bash on the industry and say that you cannot add this amenity. It just requires proper research and design and technical expertise because it is a mini swimming pool. As I started to say earlier, smaller swimming pools by volume and area are less forgiving. When I operated a 50-meter Olympic pool with over 1 million liters of water, that was way more forgiving than a 7,000-liter hot tub where the chemistry is up and down and up and down all the time based on dirty people. If you have questions about operating a cold plunge in Alberta I didn't cover, please feel welcome to drop those in the comments below. Give this video a like if you found it helpful, and check out some of the other videos we have on the channel about water safety, drowning prevention, pool operations, the certified pool operator course, as well as interviews with other aquatic professionals. If there's other topics you'd like to see in the future, please feel free to email those suggestions. My email is listed in our channel contact information, or pop those in the comments down below. I read each and every comment. I appreciate you being here watching this video. Thank you so much, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye for now.